Story 1. I left my church at 16. I'm now 37. It was a Southern Baptist church, and the hypocrisy is what drove me away. The judgment of women for not being virgins, referring to them as a used-up piece of chewing gum if they had sex before marriage. The idea that drinking is as bad as murder. I worked at a bar in college, and some of these good God-fearing people were regulars. Also, guess who had sex before marriage? They did. I've also been interested in science and was told that wasn't ladylike. My parents still attend that church, and the new pastor is my age. They no longer preach the old-fashioned ways, but I won't go back. Story 2. When I was 14, my brother got acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. He hid his diagnosis from everyone. He didn't want people to know he was gay. All the while, I was forced to go to a church that ranted against gay people. When he died because he'd hidden his diagnosis so long from everyone and would rather die than put that on his name or our family name in our very conservative town, I had to listen to them tell us that gay people go to hell while also hosting my brother's funeral. I still have nights just thinking about my brother dying, knowing he was dying alone because he was scared of the judgment, knowing he could never tell us how he really felt, admit if he was scared, tell us what he really wanted us to know before he went. He never got to be himself. We never got to really know him. First, they told us it was hepatitis, then they told us it was cancer. Then he had Kaposi's sarcoma. I think my mom knew by then, but my dad and the rest of our community and our extended families just wouldn't have accepted it. I still, to this day, have family members who just say he died of cancer. My brother was a good guy. He didn't deserve that. When I saw how they treated a normal, innocent person who I cared about, who was really no different than me, I knew it was all falsehoods. All just made-up stories to control people. My other brother was gay as well, and the minute he turned 17, he ran away from home. That's just how bad it was around us. After the torment both my brothers went through, my mom became a home hospice nurse for acquired immunodeficiency syndrome patients, and she's been a staunch advocate for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender plus, and pretty much my entire family as well. The messages churches are sending out about transgender people are the same exact rulebook, the same unfounded bullet points they used in the George Bush era when gay marriage was being proposed when gay men were getting hate crimed. Story 3. When stillborn babies, who were not baptized, were buried under the hedge near the cemetery because they could not be buried in the cemetery itself. Such a heartless religion. Story 4. A 49-year-old priest I'd known my whole life approached and seduced my teenage male friend and sexually assaulted him while he was attempting to convert to Catholicism. Later, after pressing charges, my friend committed suicide right before the trial. Goodbye, church. Story 5. There was no final straw. It was just a slow realization during an absence caused by a combination of the most religious family member, who was the heart of our Sunday services attendance, passing away and me saying, yeah, that makes sense to things that were different from what the Bible or its local representatives taught. I suppose the final completion point came when some local churches were caught protecting their pedophiles. But by then, that was the final nail in an already buried coffin. Story 6. Weird youth pastor went on a tirade about how your life is worthless if you're not converting people regularly to a bunch of 13-year-olds. My parents finally agreed that I didn't have to go to church anymore. Story 7. Just the nonsense was enough. I won't mention exactly which one it was, but it's a problem in almost all of them. Several years ago, I dared to challenge the beliefs of the community with some evolutionary knowledge and facts like the Earth being round. Needless to say, I was asked to leave just so they wouldn't have to expel me. Story 8. It wasn't one final straw or big event. I was raised in a community of well-meaning but misguided people who failed to recognize my values and beliefs. So I left. Story 9. I was in the church youth group. A boy I had a big crush on bragged about his summer vacation activities. He and his brother visited their cousins in Texas. They liked to go out and find homosexuals to beat up as a fun family activity, like visiting an amusement park. We went to different schools. I had gay friends at my school. He and his brother were huge. Everyone else was very impressed and congratulated him for being such a good Christian. I was horrified and stopped going to church not long afterwards. Story 10. I prayed and pleaded to the Holy Trinity to get my uncle to stop molesting me after my family accused me of trying to get attention. There is no good God that allows that to happen for any reason, nor for any plan. Story 11. As I got older, I started to feel guilty while praying because I didn't truly believe anymore. It felt like more of an obsessive-compulsive disorder type of thing. Although I think life has been more challenging without that sort of faith, but I can't pretend to believe in something either and feel good about it. Story 12. Pastoral greed for overserving a congregation. The husband and wife pastoral team carry on as if nothing is happening when clearly only one of them is needed. The enabling committee or council help them to bilk the congregation of precious money. Make no mistake, in my experience, very few pastors practice what they preach. Hypocrites. Story 13. At my dad's funeral, the pastor told us that we will never see our dad again if we do not get right with God and start going to church. That was the final straw. Story 14. There wasn't one. I asked questions that no religion has a good answer for. First, I was afraid of that. Then I decided that if there was a God and he was good, my faith shouldn't matter. Any God that would punish a person trying to be good with eternal torture just for disbelief is a monster and not good. That let me start exploring further, and the questions began piling up. The first question I asked before that was, why is my religion more correct than others? Story 15. Getting out in the community. Really? The church I was raised in was one of those super strict ones that thought women wearing pants was a huge issue. They would always preach about how gay people were sent here by Satan. I started working with a company that had offices worldwide. The people came from a very diverse background that was somewhat bewildering to my sheltered, redneck self. I got to know and become friends with not just one, but many gay people. I just couldn't go to that church anymore. These nice gay folks were spending their days off volunteering at the local food banks, helping the homeless, and this church thinks they are bad people, demons. I never saw a single person in that church do anything for the community. Story 16. A lady explained to me that my dog, who just died, wouldn't be in heaven waiting for me since a dog can't accept Jesus Christ as their personal savior. I'd rather be in hell and have my dog, lady. Story 17. It wasn't one big thing. It was many things that just built up until I got fed up and left. The worst thing was when they punished me for being a victim of sexual assault. I was told to keep silent about it so I didn't ruin my dad's ministry. Apparently, that was more important than his child. I was also told I deserved it because I chose to be the guy's girlfriend, and in their mind, it meant I asked for it. I grew up Pentecostal. Courting and dating were for marriage, and even though I was taught to trust someone that I saw a future with, at the same time, I was blamed for trusting him. Make it make sense. Story 18. When the new pastor decided that we needed to move away from serving the local community and move to knowing God. The God I want to believe in is pretty straightforward. The main thing is to look after those in the community who are most disadvantaged. Forget theology, stick with service. Story 19. Not to sound like an elitist snob, but literally just becoming more educated. Learning the history and evolution of various religions, the history of mankind as a whole, seeing patterns of how religions are used and contorted to control groups of people or to allow great atrocities to occur, seeing the embedded misogyny and racism within various religions, and most of all, the hypocrisy of the religious. Story 20. There really wasn't a final straw moment. I just gradually grew up enough to see that this was just make-believe like Santa Claus. There was a period of time somewhere after I realized I didn't believe this stuff where, it may sound odd, but I was afraid to admit it to myself. Christianity is essentially a hostage scenario. If you go apostate, you go to hell. Years of having been threatened with torture forever if I didn't toe the line left me mentally wrecked for a bit. But, like dipping your toe into a hot bath, I gradually acclimated to it and figured out how to own my lack of belief. Story 21. I came to realize that most religious people I met were that way for selfish reasons. Rather than being and doing good for the right reasons, most I know are only there to try and guarantee their ticket to heaven gets punched. They don't really care about others. They just want to make sure they get their afterlife. Story 22. Young pastor continually transferred to small, struggling churches. living off donations and food stamps and our own paychecks. State church leader came to visit one Sunday and gave us a plaque praising our efforts but no practical help for us. He was driving a Mercedes. We're not churchgoers anymore and our faith is our own. Story 23. The stunning hypocrisy that was on display. Getting in bed with politicians for their own gain, showing contempt for anyone not in their clique and covering up abuse, that sort of thing. Story 24. I was never in religion willingly. My parents forced me to go to church growing up. I am 50 years old and I have never gone to church once on my own, other than a wedding or funeral. I used to appease my parents and go on Christmas, but I have not even done that in 10 years. What politics has done to religion has made it impossible for me to even sit through one service a year. Story 25. For me, it was like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole for way too long. I kept thinking, maybe this time it will work. But then, I found myself in a situation where I was told that love and acceptance only applied to certain people. That was the moment I realized I would rather find my own path than follow rules that did not make sense to me. Plus, when your coffee tastes better than the sermons, it is definitely time to reconsider your options. Story 26. It was a year-long process in which I became convinced I was reprobate. Scripture says to draw near to the Lord, and he will draw near to you. Yet, despite years of sincerely trying to communicate and listen to God, there was never anyone there. I still absolutely believed he existed but had chosen not to want a relationship with me. After a horrible existential crisis, thinking for months that I was destined to burn in hell for eternity, I eventually found YouTube videos by atheists who essentially helped me find out more about being non-religious, if that makes sense. After several more months, I eventually realized I no longer believed. I didn't want to deconvert. It just sort of happened on its own. I now realize I was dealing with the problem of divine hiddenness. Ironically, many of the people in the church I went to who constantly raised their hands in worship and cried tears turned out to just be lukewarm Christians who cheated on their spouse, drove drunk, were greedy. Yet, for some reason, God revealed himself to them, and not the boy who was sincerely seeking for 15 years. It was then that I understood people are experiencing what they expect they should be experiencing. It's a psychological process happening in your brain. Story 27. I'm a young woman in her 20s, and I have a close friend who is a young man. He isn't my husband. He is just my friend. Sometimes I spend time alone with him just talking. I got judged for that. I was called a whore for having a male friend. I no longer hang out with the Mormons. Story 28. My friend David grew up deeply religious, but doubts crept in over time. The turning point came when his close friend was ostracized by their church for being gay. David questioned how a faith that preached love could be so harsh. After trying and failing to find compassionate answers from church leaders, the final straw was a sermon on sin and punishment that conflicted with his beliefs about kindness. He walked out that day knowing it was the end of his faith. I supported him that day and still do. Story 29. I left when I was 18. I was sexually assaulted by my grandfather. My father told me it was my fault because of how I look and how my body is formed, and that the Catholic thing to do would be to forgive him because he couldn't control himself. Almost everyone in my family, very conservative Catholics who went to church every Sunday and preached their beliefs to everyone around them, took their side and made up awful lies about me. The whole experience really changed the way I view organized religion. To most followers, it's essentially a cult. Story 30. I never really liked going or connected with the whole concept, but in one of my school health classes, we learned how to recognize abusive relationships and the difference between love and fear of a supposed consequence. That finally made me realize I only listened to the messages because I was afraid of the consequences. If I couldn't reject this form of abuse, would I ever be able to really stand up for myself if it ever happened to me? So I stopped going. Story 31. The excuse for being treated poorly is always, this is God's will, and he has better plans. Bad people hide behind God so they have excuses for being bad people. Story 32. One of my first jobs was working for a Christian call center that took calls for the Jim Bakker Show. Seeing how that man manipulated people for money under the name of God pretty much did it for me. But he wasn't the only one. I took calls for other ministries, and they were pretty much the same. Story 33. No going outside without a man. No wearing what I want. No makeup, no music, no life. I'm cursed day and night by everyone. When I open a book, podcasts, or TV channels, all they do is tell me how I'm the reason for all evil because I'm female, how I'm nothing, inferior, and dumb. Oh, newsflash, all Islamic countries are ruled by Muslim men, and they are corrupt. No one helped Palestine. They're the most misogynistic countries. But hey, let us just ignore these and focus on your tantalizing lip gloss. It's completely weird how religion honors women, but all I see are privileges for men. It seems like religion is a bunch of rules women must adhere to, while men just ensure women follow those rules. Polygamy for men, inheritance for men, control for men. I can't go to heaven unless I obey my husband, not the other way around. If I don't fulfill his desire, I'm going straight to hell. He can beat me, lock me in the house. I must obey my husband more than my father. Long list. Anyway, just be a girl and live in an Islamic society. You will be their source of all evil. If the economy goes down, it's my fault. If I get sexually assaulted, it's my fault. If Omar gets sick, it's my fault.